Okay. Okay, everybody. So we're going to get started now. And we have several of our members are back online. So that's great to see for another ERC Zoom call. And we have Gabby Gaudet of TVG. She came on and joined us today. And Gabby, we're going to start obviously with the obvious. Gabby, up until recently, had, obviously has been working for TVG, and Gabby's in Foal. And I don't know, I don't even know if we're going to make it through this recording. Gabby, we're due any day now, aren't we?
Breeders' Cup Sunday is my due date. Good timing on my part. So yeah, we're just a couple days out.
That's it. So we're just going to get a little bit. I know many of you are familiar with Gabby. She was at Gulfstream Park. Actually, after I was at Gulfstream Park for a few years doing the commentary, the handicapping down there, Gabby took the helm, and obviously just what a wonderful job she did there, and then went on to TVG. But Gabby, can you tell us a little bit, for those who may not know, where did you get your start? How did you get involved in horse racing?
So I definitely have a horse racing background. My father was a first generation trainer, and my mom first generation trainer. And it's just all in my life. My sister is now a trainer. My mom helps her in the barn. I had two aunts that were jockeys. I've got a cousin that is a blacksmith, farrier. So literally, there are so many people in my family that are involved in racing. And in turn, I married a trainer. Go figure. But I first started out doing the simulcast. I was a paddock host in Maryland at Pimlico and at Laurel. And then I did some work at Arlington and then Gulfstream. I eventually worked for Naira and did the Fox shows for a little bit, and then got a full-time position with TVG. So that's kind of the last several years of my career. But for a short period of time, actually, when I was in high school and in college, I did gallop horses. So I kind of have the experience of being on the backside and galloping horses, and I still try to do it. I don't gallop by any means, but I still try to ride in my free time as well. So just not recently. They don't advise that for pregnant women. So, so yeah, that's kind of my background, and here we are.
Well, all around horsewoman, of course. And I just got to tell you, Gabby's mother, Linda, is just, I have like an obsession with her mother. She's just an absolute superstar. Of course, I met her sister as well. But her mom is just like, she's the type of, not only horsewoman, woman, wouldn't you say, Gabby, that she's just got everything together. She's like, for me, somebody to really look up to, I gotta say.
She does. I've learned so much from her. I would say the horseman side of things, I've learned a lot from my husband and from my dad. But going to the sales, that's kind of been a new thing that I've integrated into my broadcast and coverage, is doing the Keeneland sales in the last 2 years or so. And my mom has a wealth of knowledge at the sale. And I've learned so much from her, from weanlings to yearlings to 2-year-olds. But yeah, she's a wonderful, knowledgeable horseman as well. But she helps me in other aspects of life too. Lucky.
Yeah, definitely. Now, you mentioned the sales, which I think is a really good point, and how you've integrated that into your wheelhouse, right? So tell us a little bit, how important is it? Because now we have a lot of members on here that are looking to take that next step. Many of them actually have invested in horses. They bought shares in horses. They're looking to potentially own horses. How important is it to really have an idea of what's going on at the sales, in terms of then taking that next step with the horses, how they're performing on the racetrack and that type of thing?
When I first got into the sales, I would say it was pretty shocking how separate these two kind of very important entities in the industry are. You have your sales world and you have your racing world, and there is a little bit of overlap, but I was surprised at the lack of overlap, I would say, like with individuals actually within the industry. And it's incredibly important. If you have a pretty good knowledge of the sales and racing, I would say that that gives you a huge advantage if you can kind of keep your finger on the pulse on both sides of the industry. And it's just really important to pay attention to breeding, to what stallions are doing, obviously brood mares, going to the sales. I love going to the sales and actually looking at horses. You learn so much from just looking at horses, and just observing their demeanor. I mean, it's been, I would say, when I first got into the sales side of it, it was a little overwhelming because there are so many new players. There are so many pedigrees. There's so many layers to the sales side of things. But then you start to, it really is such an advantage when you can teach yourself a little bit of those things. Like, for example, and it could be as simple as just reading a couple of articles and paying attention to what stallions are doing, like say Gun Runner and what he's done with his first crop of his babies this year, his 2-year-olds. And I mean, it's been absolutely outstanding. So yeah, I would say that has been, and personally, it's helped me in the racing side of things too. So I do think it's important to have a little bit of knowledge in both kind of sections of the industry.
Well, I think, you make a really good point, because I know that you have a very strong, you've always really had this, even before you got into the sales side of it. You had that ability to get into the paddock, and you were like, one of your jobs is the paddock lady, right? So you're looking at the horses, you're assessing what you're seeing, you're looking at body language, you're looking at basically, just what's going on there. And I actually really enjoyed doing that too. When I was at Gulfstream, that was one of my things, like watching them and just, looking at them in the paddock. So, but I think it starts to, I think what's really started to happen, what I noticed was, having seen really good horses come through the sales, quality horses, you started to see, you got 2-year-olds coming out, walking out into the paddock. You start to see there's glimmers of that quality. You could see that quality oftentimes before a horse ever ran a race. And that's obviously, that could be an important thing for handicapping as well on the day when you don't have really any other information other than works to go by.
During COVID, obviously we had to make a lot of adjustments, and I worked from home a lot, and I still do kind of work from home a lot. And I found that to be one of the most difficult transitions, especially in the spring when you have a lot of baby races and you're just working off of pedigree. Pedigree can take you only so far, and works can only take you so far, but there's no better sense of what a horse can do than when you see them in the flesh and in the paddock. And I would say, especially at one place in particular, and I know it's a very short meet, but this is just a glaring example, was at Kentucky Downs. And there were a lot of baby races, and Kentucky Downs is like in an open field. And when you could really see which horses were okay with it and just mentally wrapped around the whole idea of just going out in a field and running in this undulating course. And then others just completely, they lost it. They couldn't mentally wrap their heads around what was happening, because it is such an unconventional course. And that's just one example of, you can apply it to so many different things, whether it be big days. And that's why it's, it applies for the Breeders' Cup too. When you see these juveniles, especially, or horses that have some idiosyncrasies on the day, if they just look like they're not liking it, if they can't handle the big crowd and the shipping out to a warmer, a lot of the time we have horses going from New York and Kentucky, and they're going to Del Mar, which is, it's not the hottest place in the country, but it's warmer. And if they're handling all those things well. So yeah, I agree with Christina. I mean, if I could have it my way, I'd be in the paddock all day.
Yeah, exactly. Me too. I've told you that before too. That's my favorite spot to be. And that's how I bet that way too. I always go in and I'll look at them first. But we're going to have, Gabby, let's start talking about a couple of the races. It's funny. I just got a text from Mike Welsh, and he's like, okay, guys, you just got to realize all the races have been drawn. So I can't, because Mike takes giving us his picks very, very, very Seriously. So, and of course, we all, as I said, the races are being drawn as we speak. So post position, that kind of thing, we're not going to have access to all that information right at the moment, but we'll do our best, right, Gabby? And we'll talk about a few of the races. And everybody who's on the line, if anybody wants to ask Gabby or Mike later on a question, feel free to let us know where on the reactions tab, just, put the hand up or even just wave to me, and we'll open up your mic and you can ask a question as soon as we have a good break. So we can do that. So Gabby, we'll just start. I think maybe we'll just start off with the Friday races, with a couple of the Friday races. And I know one of the races that you had mentioned that was a bit of an interest to you was the juvenile turf sprint. And specifically Averly Jane. And tell me like a little bit, first of all, we'll talk about Wesley Ward too. His ability or his success with 2-year-olds, especially early in the season, sends them to Royal Ascot. A lot of these come back. They perform very well throughout the year. Tell me a little bit, not only about Averly Jane, but Wesley's horses in particularly, like in this division.
He's just had a sensational couple of years, and just his ability to prepare 2-year-olds. I actually had the opportunity last Breeders' Cup. So right now we do this thing called Breakfast at the Breeders' Cup. I'm unfortunately not able to do it this year. Really, I have FOMO big time because it's my favorite thing to do throughout the year. But we did do it last year at Keeneland, and TVG, they show the works every single morning leading up to the Breeders' Cup. And I had the chance, we were shooting a feature on Wesley Ward, and I had the chance to go out and spend a morning with him at Keeneland. And he's got his horses in the tobacco barn. It's so he can be there year round. Horsemen, they have to kind of ship their horses in and out during the spring and the fall. At Keeneland, if they're not on Rice Road or if they don't have a permanent barn, but Wesley keeps his horses there. And it was just eye-opening to see his operation. A lot of the time, traditionally, trainers have a training chart that they give to their help in the morning or the day before. And he just kind of flies by the seat of his pants. He's like, yeah, let's do this with that horse and this. And he's just kind of a mad genius. When he's actually in the barn and operating with his staff and his horses. And in the fields by the barn, he's got stallions, he's got mares, he's got babies, like 2-year-olds, weanlings, yearly. He's got everything going on. It was the most fascinating thing. But somehow it all works. He just makes it work. And he did tell me that in the past several years, he's changed on how he's changed his strategy on how he prepares 2-year-olds. He's actually waited a little bit longer getting them started. And it was just the conversations that I had with him were brilliant. And you could just see how he's evolved as a trainer and how he's changed his strategy with his 2-year-olds. And this year, I mean, you could see it's been unbelievable. And with Averly Jane, she's undefeated. Yeah, undefeated in 4 starts. I have my PPs in front of me. And she just looks like she keeps getting better and better. I think next year, even, she's going to be one that can probably, I mean, she's a 2-year-old now, but she can probably do anything, whether it be go against the boys in a turf sprint or go against, filly and mare sprint. I just think she's that caliber. And I think Wesley has thought that of her too. And even though she's incredibly fast, one thing that Wesley did say was that she is so smart. If you watch some of her workouts in the morning, she's naturally very fast, but she is good enough to shut off and have a target and catch the target and just be malleable. Like, she's not just a runoff type of speed filly. So I'm really excited about her. I've loved all of her races, especially her last race. And I think she's going to love the firm course at Del Mar. So I wouldn't be surprised if Wesley Ward, I feel like they've created this race for Wesley Ward because he's won almost every edition of it. But yeah, I'm excited to see her. And I think not only this year, but next year.
Yeah, well, and I think Wesley, you know, like, let's be honest, like Wesley starts them early, the 2-year-olds, like usually earlier in the year. And when I say early, not necessarily by our standards, but definitely by European standards. So he starts a lot of these 2-year-olds early. So when they go to, I always thought it was genius when he sent them to Royal Ascot, because Royal Ascot in June, a lot of the Europeans, they're not, the babies, they're not cranked up in June in
Yeah.
Europe. And also their running style is a little bit, you know, obviously Wesley trains them for speed. So which is why he does very well as well. So I agree with you, Gabby. I think that he really is a good horseman, and he's a very insightful horseman. He also gets nice quality horses too, which helps. But this particular horse, $35,000 horse by Midshipman, it's not like a pedigree that, even though I will say Midshipman, he's a useful stallion. I mean, the pedigree doesn't necessarily like just fly off the page.
No, probably the only really significant horse that Midshipman has had is Lady Shipman, and
Mm-hmm.
she too was a sprinter, turf
Mm-hmm.
sprinter, dirt sprinter. She could do both. But that's what we kind of see from Wesley. I don't think he always goes for those high priced purchases at the sales. And he knows exactly what he's looking for at the sale. He wants a big engine. He wants a precocious looking horse. And it doesn't, I think he pays more attention to the physical instead of the actual pedigree. He's done this for so many years that he knows exactly what works and what he looks for. And you can see that from her physically. She's just got a lot of natural muscle. And from the get-go, even when she debuted in the spring, I could remember she had all the pieces together already. So she just kind of looked like a natural athlete. And that's kind of his edge at the sale too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And I think especially with the young horses, when they have it up there, when they really can early on, when they can get it together, and like you said, they don't melt down going to the track, or when they can actually switch on and switch off, like it's such a huge advantage, especially for these young horses that don't have experience. But Gabby, so now jumping now to the dirt fillies, another horse that we have to talk about, another undefeated horse, and that's Echo Zulu. And here's like a little bit of a difference now, by a young stallion, Gun Runner. But Gun Runner he's had a lot of success with his first crop. This one cost $300,000. That's like a decent amount of money for a first crop sire. So, and Steve Asmussen, here's another guy. He knows what he's doing.
Oh yeah, definitely knows what he's doing. With Gun Runner, yeah, that is a high purchase price, especially as a yearling. I mean, if you're not thinking that this horse worked really fast at a 2-year-old sale and had, you don't really get to see behind the curtain. You're just buying this horse probably because of the physical and because it's by Gun Runner and Steve and Ron Winchell, who owns part of this filly too. They obviously had experience with Gun Runner. But the funny thing about Gun Runner, I think before we saw any of his runners, a lot of people thought that they might be late bloomers, because I wouldn't say he was a late bloomer. Like, he was pretty good from the get-go, but you could see him physically mature into a completely different animal the older he got.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like that was kind of out there, and that is not panned out. He has precocious runners. He's got multiple grade 1 winners. He's got multiple graded stakes winners. It's just been pretty unheard of what he's managed to do so far with his first crop of 2-year-olds. And Echo Zulu is one of them. And when you look at her races, she is very, very fast, but I just don't see her not being able to get 2 turns. I mean, she is just dominating. Her last race in the grade 1 Frizette was just unbelievable. She blew the doors off that field. So, and I personally, I think, what is this? It's a 1 1/16. I think she should be fine. I mean, the toughest thing, I think, in the juvenile and in the juvenile fillies, at least from my perspective, handicapping the races, even at this point of the year, you look at the past performances and you see a lot of ones, a lot of juveniles have speed. That's why they're precocious. That's why they win these races. And I think the toughest thing when you look at juvenile fillies or juvenile is trying to predict the pace, because all of these horses, or the majority of the horses, are fast. And you have to ask yourself, okay, who can get 2 turns? Who can take a little bit of pace pressure? Who can shut off? Who can show more dimensions? And, I kind of side with Mike Welch, and that post position can really come into play when you're especially looking at these juvenile races, because it can be particularly difficult for, say Echo Zulu, if she's on the rail and she goes and she gets pressure from, say, Juju's Map the whole entire way around there, it can be a real true class and stamina test. But the one thing I see from Echo Zulu is that as fast as she is, she does look like she can turn off. She's just been that good against who she's been facing.
Right, which is really important, and especially in a race like this, because as you point out, the speed there's a lot of speed in here. Obviously, there are a lot of fast fillies, let's put it that way. And another horse that we should probably mention is Hidden Connection. Here's another freshman sire, but this one didn't cost 300,000. This one cost 85,000. So this one cost a little bit less. But again, she's been sparkling. 2 starts, she's won by a lot. Now she's been winning the tracks that she hasn't been winning at Belmont and Saratoga. But what could you make a case for her?
So this is kind of a good example when you look at her win in the Pocahontas. She won that race by almost 10 lengths. Mm-hmm. Now, she was forwardly placed, and when you look at the pace, I think in the juvenile fillies, I don't think she's going to be forwardly placed. So it's at least encouraging that she proved that she can close at a 1-turn distance in her first race. Like, to me, I think she might not be fast enough, and that very well could be the case. I mean, she does have to improve a little bit to beat some of the better fillies in there, but she definitely looks like she's got dimensions. And like last time out, she was close to a slow pace. First time out, she closed. So that's what I thought was really interesting about her. And when you talk to Brett Calhoun, man, he glows when he talks about her. So you can tell that she pretty much has had talent from the get-go, and they've been really excited about her.
Okay. Now, one of the trainers that really has been so dominant on the scene this year has been Brad Cox. He has a tremendous amount, not only of horses, but good horses. And he has another one. You mentioned Juju's Map. This is a daughter of Liam's Map. Cost $300,000 a yearling. Not bad. Again, that's pretty good. Although Liam's Map has been doing pretty well with his first, I think 2 crops. I think he's got 2 crops. I think he's got a couple crops. And now here's another one. Started off at Ellis Park, won second time out, but then last time, obviously very impressive. Did you see that race at Keeneland? In I guess it was earlier. It was early last month.
Yes, I was on site, and I was actually talking to Brad Cox because I did a report. He had 2 fillies in there. One of them finished off the board, and then this filly, and I actually liked that one better. Mm-hmm. And Juju's Map, she wound up winning the race. My concern going into the Alcibiades last time out was, in watching her replays, she just seems like a really aggressive filly. So I was thinking, okay, she's got the rail. If she doesn't break, Florent Giroux is going to have a tough time trying to figure this one out because she just kind of throws her head up in the air, takes a hold of the bit, and essentially runs off the first part of it. And last time out, Flo did an amazing job because she did break well, but then he took her off the pace. And I'm like, what are you doing? You're in a perfect position. Why are you taking her off the pace? And he actually did, and gave her a target. And you could see her do the same thing, but it was for a less amount of time. She kind of was a little bit rank, keen. She threw her head, and then he got her to settle. So I think it's really been a learning curve for both of them, for the filly and for him. And that last race kind of proved to me that, hey, maybe she can relax, but it still might come down to post position. I'm not denying her talent, but she also did have a huge advantage in her last race because there were a lot of fillies that were stretching out to 2 turns for the first time. She already had a mile underneath of her. And sometimes I think that's a great separator. When horses at this stage of the game can have a distance race, it makes all the difference. We saw it even with the maiden special weight races at Keeneland. So she'll get bet because it's Brad Cox. She's a grade 1 winner. She dominated the field last time out. Personally, I'm still a little bit on the fence. I was impressed by the fact that she could eventually settle, but it's going to be a completely different situation come Breeders' Cup Friday. So just pay attention to her. She can also be a little funny in the afternoon. So that would be one to definitely kind of keep an eye on in the paddock and everything.
Okay. So now we'll look at keeping with the fillies, although moving on to the older division. Obviously in the distaff, which is on Saturday, we have to talk about Latruska. Latruska really, she's done very little wrong this year. If anything, I don't think I think she was second. Was it in her first start? She was second. I'm trying to see. Or in the Azeri, right? She finished second in the Azeri behind She Dares the Devil. Otherwise, she's just been really impressive. But Gabby, especially because you would have seen her in the Spinster, she can win by 5. She might win by half a length. So there's no real, it's not like she just blows them away all the time, but sometimes like she guts it out and she'll just get it done. So people sometimes knock her because, oh, that wasn't as impressive. What are your thoughts about Latruska?
It's so funny too, because going into the Spinster, I watched all of her replays from this year. And some were more impressive than others, like you said, Christina. And I personally thought that the Personal Ensign, she was fully extended to win that race. And so much so that I won't name any names, but I was talking to a couple of jockeys before the race and I said, what was your assessment of her last race? And they're like, man, maybe she's had a long year, maybe it's catching up to her, because they kind of agreed with me just from a visual perspective. And that didn't pan out. She was absolutely so impressive in the Spinster. But here's the thing about Latruska, which I have so much respect for her. And when you look at her in the afternoon, she's just all class. She's a tank. If you look like physically, she is a tank. And she's just kind of one of those throwback mares that you just really have to appreciate. She's got speed. They figured her out that she's better on the lead. I don't think she really likes to pass horses, but she won't let any horse pass her coming down the track, which, you have to respect and love. But the distaff might be a little bit of a bigger field. She Dares the Devil's in there. There are other horses in there that might have more speed. She's had, especially in the Spinster, I know Tyler Gaffleone, he wanted to go with her on the front end and provide a little bit of pressure on his mount. And it didn't work out. He didn't break as sharply as Latruska did, and he wasn't about to send his horse and lose all of his chances. But she got a loose lead, and she went gate to wire. The only way that I think she loses is if someone does finally either apply pressure or goes in front of her. And those are probably the only 2 ways of her losing. Now, she is a tough filly sometimes, or mare in the morning. That's why you see her run as many times as she has, because Fausto has always said, like, I can manage her better in between races and not so much working her. He's found a rhythm with her. And sometimes you see horsemen do that. They don't, if they're sound and they're good, they're going to run a lot. And so you don't have to work them that many times in between races, because she can be a little unpredictable in the morning. Mike Welch could probably speak more to that, but I did happen to watch her most recent work, her last work at Del Mar, and it was messed up.
Mhm.
And Fausto was not happy about it. There was I think a 2-year-old that broke off at the same time, and they worked together, and she wasn't supposed to work in company. So she was
Not from the same barn, right? We're
not
talking a
from the
horse from
same
another.
barn.
Okay,
Yeah, I think
yeah.
it was a Richard Baltus horse. And it just didn't go to plan. And that filly actually, I think it was a filly, passed her. So she didn't win the work per se, which I don't mind. You don't really want to ask your horse too much just because there's another horse that's there. But you could tell that it just didn't, he was not happy about it. It didn't work out very well. And I'm not saying that's not, when you talk to horsemen and when you talk to, say, Mike Welch, the last work is not necessarily supposed to be the best work or the most important work. It's more so a maintenance work. The second one out is the biggest work. But you still don't want any mishap going into a big race, especially when it's the first and only work over that racetrack,
Right.
which was the case for Letruska. So that would be, I guess those would be my only two concerns with her, is the pace / post position, and how that most recent work went.
Mm-hmm. And you were talking about speed. I think horologist, I think she seems to want to go to the front. She has been recently, and she's been running pretty well doing that. So, but again, I don't know if she's fast enough to go with Letruska, or if, sometimes they get intimidated a little bit too, because, nobody wants to go with the favorite, probably, what is she going to be, 1 to 5, or I don't know what she's going to be. And nobody wants to go with her. And then she gets out there and she rolls, she'll just roll along in front. But Gabby, I wanted to ask you, we didn't talk about this earlier, but a horse that I like Malathat. And again, she cost over $1 million. We know she's got a beautiful pedigree. She's a lovely looking filly. She's a classic winning filly. She won the Oaks. She was beat 2 back. She was beaten by Maracuja. But tell me a little bit. I mean, she's done very little wrong. She is 3 years old. But what's your take? Do you have a feeling about this filly? Did you see her in New York?
Yeah, I did see her a couple of times. I saw her in the Ashland. The one thing about her is how she looks physically. Like she's got these big features, and I can just remember her almost having like a classic look to her. Just a really beautiful, beautiful filly. I wonder if her bottom, if her maxed potential at this point, I'm not saying eventually, but at this point is good enough to beat, say, Letruska. That would be my only concern. But yeah, she has not done anything wrong. I think Todd has managed her incredibly well this year in what she's been able to do. She had a kind of a weird trip, I thought, in the Coaching Club American Oaks, so you can't really hold that against her. Maracuja beat her that day. She was a heavy, heavy favorite. But when you look at, say, like Maracuja, and you compare it to Letruska, we're talking about two very, very different animals. So, but look, it's the Breeders' Cup. Crazier things have happened. I don't know what price she'll be, and I'm pretty sure she's running Clairiere, right? Yeah, she shipped out with all of Steve's horses early, which I like. He usually ships them out. If the Breeders' Cup is on the West Coast, he'll ship them out early. She's had a couple of works at Santa Anita. I've always loved this filly. And when you talk about, a classic type of pedigree, she's by cavorting. She's out of cavorting. She's by Curlin. And I just have a feeling that she's getting better and better. So she's kind of my other horse in the distaff, but if no one goes with Letruska, it's going to be hard for her because she is a closer.
Okay. We'll move on. We'll go to the big race so we can have a few minutes to talk about the classic. And again, obviously a lot of not only attention, a lot of money, a lot of talk is going to revolve around Medina Spirit. he crossed the wire. I love, people still say he crossed the wire in front in the Kentucky Derby. He's still on top. And so for me, he's the Kentucky Derby winner until or if whether they take him down. Tell me, what are your thoughts on Medina Spirit? He's done really, really well. He was beaten in the Preakness, but he came back. He's won a couple of races. He looked pretty impressive last time. He's won at Del Mar. Obviously, that's another key factor too. So tell me a little bit, what are your thoughts on Medina Spirit?
I don't know. I still can't figure him out. I personally I shouldn't say never, but he's not one of those horses that when you look at him, you're like, wow.
Right.
Wow, I'm so impressed by how he looks, how he works, how he runs. It's all kind of workmanlike. It's always been workmanlike. And nothing against the horse. I mean, some horses are like that and he could still easily win the classic.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd be curious to even hear what Mike has to say about some of his works too. Baffert, he really likes a strong gallop out, his works. Medina Spirit's last work was just kind of okay, but I kind of felt that about a lot of his works this year. I thought his win in the Shared Belief was a little underwhelming, but he did come back and he improved in his second start. So maybe he just simply needed that race. And like you said, despite anything, it's still important to have a win over the track because Del Mar can be a little funny of a track. And it's horses, especially on the dirt, if they like it, they like it. If they don't, they don't. You can talk to a lot of people on the West Coast where you see even in this older classic division, the horses that have been around for, the past couple of years, some love Santa Anita and some just do not like Del Mar. So that's important. Yeah, look, I'm not going to pick him. I won't pick him, classic, but that doesn't mean anything. I think, sometimes I'm just so wrong about horses and sometimes you get a little biased too. And it's nothing that he's done or not done this year. I think there are horses that might be kind of peaking right now that might be a little bit better than he. And I'd be curious to see what kind of price you get on him too.
Okay. And so I guess the horse, one of the horses we have to talk about, Essential Quality. Here's another one. Obviously, beautiful pedigree. He's got it all. Let's just put it this way. He's a classic winner. And he's another horse has done very, very little wrong. He was actually beaten by Medina Spirit in the Kentucky Derby. But that, again, the Kentucky Derby is a whole other beast in itself. But what do you think about, but again, Essential Quality is one of those horses, he never wants to win by a lot. He never like blows the doors off of this field, off of these races. So, sometimes people, they knock him because they think that, oh, he just got up and just did the job.
And I think particularly so in the Jim Dandy, I think it was in the Jim Dandy this year. Some people just kind of thought, and it was on paper, probably one of his slowest races that he's run in quite some time, but he bounced back in the Traverse and got one of his fastest figures on form. But you're right. He makes you worried a little bit right before kind of when they're turning for home in between the half mile pole and the quarter pole, you're like, oh, is this going to really work out for him today? And somehow he just continuously pulls it off. And Saez, credit to him, he never, ever panics. There's some sort of very powerful bond between Louis and Essential Quality. And the one thing that I will recall, and I was just in awe. I was kind of on the fence with him in the beginning of his career, I will admit. But the one race that I was paying close attention to him was in the Bluegrass this past year. And all of the horses were loading into the starting gate. I was behind the starting gate, kind of observing all these horses. And it was a crowded day. And he there are a couple of horses that were just completely losing their composure. And he almost like looked at people in the eye in the crowd. Like you could just tell how intelligent this horse is, and just his demeanor. And he is unflappable. He really is. And he just seems like he's more talented than the horses that he faces. He's a smarter horse. He can really do anything. And that's kind of why I think he doesn't win by much, because he knows what he needs to do to win, and that's all he does. And Brad has said that he is a little bit of a lazy horse in the morning, so he likes to work him in company. And that's how Monomoy Girl was. You couldn't get her to do anything without working her in company, and she's an incredibly smart horse. So yeah, I think they only do, and if anybody has social media, you go online and you see him sleeping all the time. And those are just signs of a really, really good horse. So I'm a big fan of Essential Quality.
So now is he your pick? Is he the horse that you think you're going to go with for the race, or is there anybody else in there? Because obviously we've got Hot Rod Charlie. He's coming off a win. Nick's Go. Again, Nick's Go. I don't know. Nick's Go. I'm assuming he's running in the Classic, or are they going to run him in the Classic? Did they say that? Yeah, they are. Okay.
He's not cross-entered.
Oh, he's not. Okay. So now, so is there anybody else that you like, or are you going to go with Essential Quality?
I've been impressed by what Nick's Go has managed to do this year, I will say. His race in 1 mile and an eighth last time out was good in the Lucas Classic. But when you're, I guess my concern would be going against this field at 1.25 miles, is that going to be is he going to show his best self? Because I personally think he can get away with 9 furlongs, 1 mile and an eighth against grade 3, grade 2, maybe not the best of the best. And he can win those races, but at 1.25 miles against the best of the best, is he stretching his limitations? I don't know. But I give, Brad credit for going to the Classic, because it's a more important, prestigious race than, say, the Dirt Mile. So the other horse I think we have to kind of consider is Hot Rod Charlie. And you mentioned how Essential Quality, he doesn't win by many lengths. Hot Rod Charlie, I think his best self is actually when he's on the lead. Sometimes he's gotten into a situation where he doesn't really want to pass horses. I know if you're looking at the past performances, you're like, oh, well, he passed horses in the Haskell, but that was a very weird stretch run if you go back and rewatch it. But, I wonder what the strategy will be with him come Classic and what kind of post position he draws. So I think that's important for him. I will say I watched his last work, and I was super impressed. It seems like it's getting better. And Doug O'Neill would probably say that himself. He was just traveling over the surface really nicely. He didn't show kind of those lazy qualities that he's shown before in the past. So maybe he could be peaking at the right time too. But he's always been one of those horses where I think he's really good when he gets a really good trip. And we'll see if he gets that. But in terms of my top pick, I'm not giving you one yet.
Okay. Well, okay, that's fair enough. I see that, Kyle, you have your hand raised. We'll open up your mic and you can ask Gabby a question.
Yeah, thanks. Wanted to ask Gabby a question on Shane's behalf. What should we be looking out for on Friday to help influence our handicapping on Saturday? What takeaways can we sort of hope for the meet as a whole, or the championship as a whole?
I would definitely just pay attention to track trends, what the turf course is doing, what the dirt course is doing. And also, even if you want to get a head start, you can go back to when the Breeders' Cup was at Del Mar a couple of years ago and look at who won from what position and which post positions, were maybe compromised. You can find replays online. That's how I do a lot of my homework. I will say, I don't know, I think that would be more worth your time than comparing replays to the summer meet, because the track can really change in Del Mar from the summer meet to the fall meet. Sometimes I feel like they're worlds apart. So I think it's more significant to pay attention to Friday for Saturday, or pay attention to the last time that the Breeders' Cup was at Del Mar in the fall, and not so much how the track might have played during this past summer. That's definitely one thing. And then also, like, you know, there are some trainers that are coming in guns blazing with a lot of horses this year. Say Steve Asmussen, Brad Cox. Are those horses performing on Friday? You know, Steve and Brad have a couple of obviously juvenile races, and that might give you a good indication of like how did everybody ship, what's going on with the barn, because sometimes that happens. You know, barns have really good weekends, and sometimes they show up to the championship events and horses don't fire as well as they'd hope. So I would say those are kind of the two big things to pay attention to on Friday.
Thanks very much.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I think Joe B. Thank you, Kyle/Shane for the question. And I think Joe B. he has a question. Joe, can we open up? Hold on a second. I think I need you to open up your mic.
Got it. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
So I'm really a statistics kind of guy, and I leave looking at the horses to my wife, which she does okay. It's maddening for me, all these foreign horses that come, and the statistics are, you know, nothing. How do you size these up? Well, you know, I hear people say, "Oh, you should always bet the Europeans on the turf races because you know they're spectacular." But I'm curious to hear your opinion.
The first couple of years that I worked the Breeders' Cup, that was the hardest thing for me, because I did not pay attention to European racing year round. You look at the past performances and you're like, which are these tracks like grade A, B, or C? You know, you don't have an understanding for class. Say, you know, if here we know that a race at Saratoga is going to be better than a race at Ellis versus a race at, say, wherever, Mountaineer, you know, like we can grade the tracks A, B, and C. And that was kind of one of the harder things for me to do with European racing in England and in France in particular. So statistically, I don't know if there's much you can do except just look at past Breeders' Cups and kind of form your opinion statistically from that point, because there's still not a lot. I use 3 different softwares for my handicapping, and it doesn't, there's nothing with European racing. The biggest thing that I use, the biggest tool, is watching replays for the Europeans, and also reading a lot of articles. And you get a good gauge of the stronger horses that a particular outfit is sending this year versus maybe the weaker horses. I wish I had a better answer for you, but that's my process.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Thank you.
And I think, you know, Gabby, like, I don't know that, I think everybody does it a little bit different, because obviously many of us don't watch these horses. We don't follow them day to day. And I think, Joe, to your point, you know, one thing, a lot of the big operations, they year after years, you got the Coolmores, you got Godolphin, they really have figured out the type of horse that maybe doesn't necessarily is not ideal in Europe, but, you know, they send these horses over and they win Breeders' Cups with them. They finish, you know, in the top 3 with them, and they do it routinely. So, you know, looking for a lot of the top operations to figure out, you know, to get an idea who some of the top choices are going to be. But also, I think, you know, the Racing Post, I read the Racing Post a good amount of time now. Obviously, I do some European I cover some European racing because I work on the TDN, so I do actually some of the European stuff. I actually edit. I'm an editor for the European edition. So that's not even a bad thing to maybe in the weeks following or leading up to the Breeders' Cup. Obviously now we're right on top of it. But when they start doing the previews, it's a good idea to start looking at, you know, some of the publications, Racing Post and TDN, the Euro edition. You'll get like a feature. There's a feature on James Ferguson, who's actually a son of John Ferguson. He's a trainer. His father was a bloodstock agent for Godolphin. And he's a trainer. He won his first Group 1 a couple of weeks ago. He's got a filly running in the juvenile fillies turf. So there was a story on it in the TDN, I think it was yesterday. So, you know, there are some resources, and you do have some correspondence coming over from Europe talking about the European horses as well.
And
I know, yeah.
I will say quickly that, you know, I don't think it's smart to say like the blanket statement, bet the Europeans on the turf, because it really changes per venue. I think Europeans are totally in their wheelhouse at Keeneland per se, because they're used to softer turf conditions, or at Churchill, but Del Mar is rock hard. And sometimes Europeans, I mean, Christina, you could probably agree with me on this. They're not used to that fast turf, and you have to actually have a lot of gait speed. You have to be a little bit faster. It's not so much a stamina and class. It's more so, you know, the turf course. So I would keep that in the back of your mind too. Which horses might like firmer ground, or which horses might have had a really good season in Europe because of the softer ground.
Mm-hmm. And also the shipping. I would have to think you're coming in from Europe and you're shipping to California. As Gabby said, it's a different ball game than shipping to Keeneland or shipping to New York. Obviously, you know, we know as people getting on a plane, on all those planes, and spending all those hours on an airplane. So that has to be another consideration as well. Ashok, I see your mic is open. Did you want to ask a question?
Yeah, you know, I remember a couple of years ago when Mike was on one of these calls, he had talked about Max Player. And I've sort of been following the horse, and, you know, while it was a bit disappointing in the beginning, I think that he's a different horse since he's been in Asmussen's barn. And I just wondered if Gabby could have some thoughts and comments about that.
Yeah, he's been a difficult horse for me to kind of figure out. It's interesting to hear that Mike has liked him for a while, because, you know, I'm trying to think, his last race was really good at Saratoga, and the start prior to. His Pimlico Special, I kind of feel like I need to go back and rewatch the replay because it wasn't a good performance. But he is one of those horses that I agree with you that he's probably getting better. He's definitely gotten better since being in Asmussen's barn. And he might get kind of the right type of trip. He doesn't necessarily need the lead, but he's not going to be too far off of it. At 1.25 miles with a good trip, you know, maybe anything can happen. But I will honestly say that I don't have a strong opinion one way or the other with Max Player.
Thanks for that.
Okay. Okay, does anybody else have any questions for Gabby? I guess we're just waiting for Mike to jump on the line. I don't think Mike's on the line yet, and if he is, he can open up his mic. Mike. But Gabby, just one question. When these horses are shipping, we've talked about shipping when they're coming from Europe, when they're coming from the East Coast, now, you know, races that now out on the West Coast for Del Mar. Have you seen any trends? Are there any particular race courses that you think are a little bit more friendly, or, you know, maybe they make the transition a little bit easier? And conversely, are there any tracks, let's say on the East Coast, that when they ship west, not so much?
Well, it's a good question. I think it's not so much, it definitely, you know, it's the individual that you have to pay attention to. And horses that have done it before in the past, but my husband has always said there's kind of a window of time when you ship horses. You either really want to ship them on top of the race, or you want to ship them well in advance, because there's this window where they kind of regress a little bit. So I do think, and you'll see that with a lot of Europeans, they'll try to, well, they have to go through quarantine and everything like that. So it's a little bit different. But yeah, there's you either, I think, want to ship in, and you've seen, you know, Steve Asmussen, say, for example, he shipped pretty much all of his horses out to Santa Anita early to acclimate to the West Coast. Whereas, you know, a lot of the Kentucky horsemen, they just got on a flight on Monday or Tuesday to ship out there. So it's definitely the preference of the trainer. And a lot of the time it's easier for them. Like Brad probably wanted to see all of his horses work in Kentucky before shipping out there. But yeah, I thought that that's always been one of the more interesting things that I've learned, is that there is a window of time. You either want to ship in as on top of the race or well in advance, because kind of if you ship maybe 2 weeks out or a week out, or sorry, 2 weeks out, it's I don't know, sometimes that jet lag can sit in, and sometimes horses don't really transition very well.
Okay. All right, Gabby, thank you so much for joining us today. And we were very fortunate, guys, because she's taken some time off of TVG. So we're getting a really like a special appearance here by Gabby. And who knows, maybe we're going to have a little baby Cassie and Gaudet on Breeders' Cup Friday or Breeders' Cup Saturday. So thank you, Gabby, for joining us. We appreciate having you on.
He'll probably it'll probably happen post time for the Classic. That's probably what's going to happen. But
of course.
Thank you all.
Okay, bye, Gabby. Thank you.
Bye.